Giles Brown.
Let's talk.
My next guest, if you were listening a couple of weeks ago, you know that I had Oliver Bullough, the journalist and author, who writes about basically financial crime, offshore skullduggery, the former Soviet Union. We had to cut the interview short, so it was going so well, we decided to do it. If you like, because every great interview deserves a sequel. I'm delighted to say that Oliver has taken time out from his very busy schedule to join me this time. He assures me that we are good to go. Now, the book is called Everybody Loves Our Dollars, about money laundering. And we had started the conversation because many of us will be unaware of the scale of how cash is still king. Delighted to welcome back onto the show, second time around, Oliver. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm really glad to be back.
I'm very glad to have you back indeed. You say what is the spark behind the book then? Everybody Loves Our Dollars.
So I've written a couple of books previously about financial crime, both of which were pretty critical about, almost everyone actually, police officers, government officials, financial institutions, you name it. I sort of said that they were all doing a pretty terrible job. People would get in touch with me having read the book and they would say, I was being a bit mean. They were working hard. They were doing their best. And it was terrible of having me sitting on the sideline throwing rotten tomatoes at them. And could I stop? And so I suppose I thought, well, take them at their word. If they are all working really hard, if the guys in the bank compliance departments who are there to check that, the banks aren't moving dirty money, and if the guys in the police agencies who are there to arrest miscreants who are committing financial crime, and if politicians are coming up with the right laws and the laws are being implemented and yada, yada. Yeah. If they're all working as hard as they can, why are they failing? Because they are, right? So, the question is money laundering, which is, it's sort of a bit of a bland term, money laundering, but it's really important. It's the way that criminals get to keep the money that they've stolen. So it's the support industry for all the worst people in the world. Money laundering, as far as we know, is the same proportion of the global economy now as it was in the 1990s. Since that time, we've passed 1 billion laws. We've employed thousands and thousands of police officers. We've created these huge, very bureaucratic, very process-heavy checks on the movement of money. So if you want to move money from the UK to Spain, then it's all going to be scrutinized. If you want to move the money from Spain to China, it's going to be scrutinized, and all this. So there is a giant system in place, but it's completely failing. So why is it failing? That's the question I set out to answer. It's a pretty important question, actually, because, if you think about how much money is stolen annually, we're talking about trillions of dollars or euros. And if it's that much money, we're talking about, literally billions of victims. And that's a really big deal.
The thoughts have struck me because we're supposed to be, whenever I'm doing one of my phone-in shows, people are saying, oh, yeah, but we're going to a cashless society and everyone's going to have chips in their hands and, and you won't be able to move and you have a credit score and this, that, and the other. And it just strikes me, Oliver, that it's going to be the ordinary, person in the street who gets hampered by a cashless society. And yet, if you have millions/billions that you want to nefariously move around the world, then cash is still very much king. And part two of that question, because I thought I'd double load it, is the fact that, it is the fact that we look at this from a first world perspective, i.e. in the technically advanced West, perhaps we are moving things electronically cash. However, in other places, maybe the Gulf states, maybe, Bali, Indonesia, cash is still king. And then, of course, we have the spectre of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there.
I thought I'd let you talk a bit, Oliver.
Cash, everywhere in the world, cash use is declining, right? It might be from a higher or a low base. I'm sitting in the UK where, cash is really, it's not disappearing, but fewer than 1 in 10 of transactions now use cash. In quite a lot of the European countries, particularly Germany and Austria, they have more of a kind of attachment to cash. But even there, the proportion of transactions in which people use cash is going down all the time. So, we're not taking it out of the bank in order to use it. So you would imagine that the amount of cash that's being printed by, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve and so on would be declining because we're not using it. But actually the opposite is happening. They're printing more cash all the time. The amount of euros in circulation hit 1.6 trillion in December, which is the highest ever. The amount of dollars is now up above 2.4 trillion, which is twice what it was a decade ago. Even in, rainy old Britain, we're almost got 100 billion pounds worth of pounds out there, which is, 7 billion up on last year. So, there is this very strange disconnect between the fact that, you, me, ordinary people, we're not using cash. And yet our governments continue to print it in almost unimaginable quantities. I mean, I visited the printing press in Fort Worth, Texas, where they print the dollars. It is an incredible place, like this sheer efficiency. I mean, they're printing like between 80 and 90 banknotes a second, every hour, every day. It is absolutely jaw-dropping. And even that can't keep up with demand. They're building a whole new factory in Maryland to print more of them. And, there is this very weird disconnect, therefore, between, governments are imposing these really tight checks on everyone, really, to make sure that we're not laundering money, making sure all of our financial transactions are scrutinized and imposing these really heavy costs on banks to employ all the people to do all that scrutinizing, while at the same time governments are printing all of the cash, which is available and used by criminals to evade those restrictions. Because most of the dollars which are being printed, and when I say most, it's not hyperbole, I mean literally most of them go overseas. They don't stay in the US. These are being used by criminals in Mexico, South America, all across the world. I mean, and the same is true to a lesser extent of euros. Euros also go outside the Eurozone where they're used, by criminals globally. Cash remains king. It is the most useful tool for any criminal wanting to evade, police scrutiny. But you mentioned crypto right at the end. Crypto is on the up, particularly what are called stable coins, which are a particular kind of crypto, which is crypto that's pegged to a real life asset. So it's essentially a digital dollar. Those are on the up. Those are super useful. So maybe if I came back on in 4 or 5 years, cash would finally be on the decline because criminals would all move to crypto. That hasn't happened just yet, but they're certainly adopting it. Pretty large.
And if you've got something like a crypto, or if you've got a rogue state, presumably, because these are all interlinked. I mean, if I'm running a nefarious business in the UK, I've linked up. It is only a Guy Ritchie movie fallacy that it's all based in the East End and they all love their mothers. Because internationally, you only have to look at some of the events that happened in Dubai with a wedding a decade ago, and there were Dutch police sitting in there trying to pick up a Dutch gangster crime leader, and then they couldn't believe the number of people who were walking into the foyer of the best known hotel in Dubai, because they were coming in from South America, they were coming in from Central America, they were coming in from Ireland, they were coming in from Spain, and it was like it'd almost be funny if it wasn't so serious, because we now have international criminals working together, if you like. It is the James Bond Spectre network, if you wanted to get all 007 on us, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the what connects them all together is the money, the way that they move their money around, the way that they will cooperate to move money around. It feels a little bit like, if you look at those family trees of Europe before World War I, where every single royal family was married to another one, Queen Victoria was like everyone's granny, that situation where you've got, criminal gangs doing people trafficking in Southeast Asia. You've got, groups, the kind of European cartel bosses sitting in Dubai, whether there's Irish or Dutch or whoever, the cartels in South America, they're all marrying each other's children to each other. They're all doing business with each other. Like you say, they're all attending each other's weddings. It is a globalized business. I mean, it is as globalized as, the legitimate economy. And I've speak to, the analysts in law enforcement who try and track this stuff. They say that the money launderers are far more efficient when they come to moving cash than any bank is. They don't have to worry about compliance departments. They don't have to employ anyone to make sure transactions are legitimate. They just make it happen as quickly as possible. You want $100,000 in cash in Rotterdam, right? When do you want it? That's as straightforward as it is. And they are unbelievably entrepreneurial, unbelievably quick. And it's really important to stress this, that governments have really lagged behind in their conception and their response to what's happening.
Because here's the thing, but the governments are always move at glacial speed. But in a world where technology 5 years ago is might as well be Stone Age to my goddaughters. And so by the time they've got legislation in place, It's already moved on. And if you think about it, if you are a young person and you have very little contact with the outside world and you want to have the Lamborghini when you're 20 and you get somebody saying, here's some money to go deal crypto for me, and you can do it you don't even have to leave your own home, and you can do it from a laptop. How the bejesus are they going to actually, you may be laundering money that's come from one of these gangs, it's gone through the system, it's out, it's gone by the time, somebody who's trying to monitor this, and think of the billions of young people who are in crypto off their phones now. This is. I mean, you say it would make the Florentines, and I love the Medici. Trust me. They would love this, but they would be 4 steps behind.
Well, I mean, they were pretty slick operators. I reckon they would have been early adopters of crypto. They'd be like those guys who bought Bitcoin when it was like, worth a pizza, and now they're sitting on it and it's worth
stabbing each other in the naves in the churches. I'd love that sort of stuff. That'd be good fun. Yeah.
No, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But I mean, it is obviously technology is racing ahead. The criminals are, unbelievably good at being early adopters of this stuff, but also we're making it super easy for them. Crypto is useful, but at the end of the day, if you want to buy, drugs or pay for prostitution or whatever on the street, you're still going to be doing that in cash. We don't need to make it as easy for people to access cash. I mean, $100 bills, 80% of the dollars which are printed are on $100 bills. Where do they go? No, you never see them in the United States. If you go there, they're not good for anything. People don't want them, take them off you to buy a coffee. We don't need to print them at all. I mean, you're sitting in the EU. The EU's got 200 euros, 100 euro bills. Yeah. It used to have 500 euro bills. I mean, they don't print them anymore. But we don't need that. In the UK, we have a £50 note. You never see them. We don't need them. They are only really useful for people who want to move large amounts of value around at one time. And that's basically criminals.
Yeah, because my father's real estate, we've been in Marbella for 40 years on the southern coast of Spain, right? So there's enough luxury property and luxury goods and whatever, we'll come on to those in a minute. But we have tales of the 90s of literally people turning up from the former Soviet Union, and there'd be the small guy, and then there'd be a huge guy called Boris or whatever, Vlad, and he would have this true story with the steel briefcase, open it up, and there was, hundreds of thousands of euros to buy the property in cash. And before the Spanish banking put the new laws in, that was fine. It was like, cash is king.
I mean, but then even now, there was an interesting proposal last year in France to suggest that, for an average French tax resident, the limit of the amount of cash you can spend is €1,000. But they don't have that limit for non-tax residents if you're a visitor to France. And this is a way that there is a gigantic amount of money laundering, value transfer that happens through the purchasing of luxury goods in France's world-famous luxury goods shops, particularly Chinese money laundering gangs like to buy, handbags made by, all the brands, and ship them to China, and it's a way of moving value between continents. They thought of bringing in a restriction last year in France to limit non-tax residents to the same limit that French tax residents have. And there was a rebellion by the luxury brands who said, no, we can't have this. And you're in a situation where their business model is so dependent on money laundering that they really don't want there to be a restriction. And it is a really important point to recognize how incredibly embedded this is in the formal economy, things that we think of as the formal economy. And, police officers are kind of a little bit prone to hyperbole, but, the guys have told me that, if you walk down the Brompton Road in London, which is one of the big luxury shops, you can see, just by standing at one spot by the tube, there are 4 luxury watch shops within 100 meters, and they tell me every single one of those, they're basically just money laundering outlets. We hear a lot of talk about, vape shops, candy shops, hairdressers, which are being used as money laundering on a small scale. But, on a big scale, so are the big luxury watch shops, so are the big luxury goods outlets. It's all embedded in everything that we see all day, every day.
You only have to look at the luxury car store. Again, I'm lucky or unlucky. You must come over for a fact-finding trip. But, I'm based in Marbella. You cannot move for luxury cars and luxury goods and the whole thing. But the other thing is, because they're still building Spain, apparently, here. It is, you have luxury branded villas. You can buy a Dolce & Gabbana. You'll be able to buy a Dolce & Gabbana villa in a couple of years' time in Marbella. Our starting price, average price, 32 million for an apartment. Now, with the best will in the world, there are very few of us out there who can afford 32 million. And even if you had 32 million and you were a superstar, you wouldn't want to live in a luxury development. So therefore, like that, you'd buy a huge villa somewhere. So if we say that, it's got nothing to do with our lives, well, it has, because if you go to London and you see the astronomical prices of property and the new build, and they're still being snapped up, or in Dubai or in Bali. And if you take a pause for a minute beyond the real estate hype of us all being interconnected, we can work from anywhere. It's the virus has made that all these international business people can now live in Bali. And they are putting the money into high-end properties, and it suits their needs. The properties get higher and higher and higher, and as more money comes in, and you're nodding, so I must have got something right, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is sometimes I wonder if the people really committed to our high streets are criminals anyway, because they need to engage in this. The rest of us are all, buying stuff on Amazon, But it's funny when you mentioned Dolce & Gabbana, I just thought of an amusing example of something of this I've seen in the past. There was a Ukrainian oligarch I was trying to investigate for a long time, whose business, whose industry and his wealth was based on his control of what was at the time the largest illicit market for fake designer goods in Europe. It was where all the fake, Dolce & Gabbana stuff that you see all across Eastern Europe, it all came into the port of Odessa, and he had this gigantic market, it was so huge you could literally see it from space. And his kids lived in Monaco happily, were spending all daddy's money. And there was, on his daughter's Instagram, she was a real socialite. There was a joyous thing when there were photos of her hanging out with Dolce & Gabbana, the actual people. And so daddy is selling fake Dolce & Gabbana from Europe's biggest market in Odessa. And baby girl is hanging out with the real people. And that, in terms of turning straw into gold, it was the most amazing example of what you can see, and how, easy it is to move from being, essentially a mobster in Ukraine to being, a valued member of the golden youth in Europe. It's just 2,000 miles. And hey presto, suddenly you're hanging out with the real thing.
But the thing is, you see, I mean, we can all get indignant at the whole situation. But the problem is that, obviously, Oliver, you and I have the highest moral standards, et cetera, known to man. But a lot of people will just say, just show me the money. I mean, we live in, you could say, and I'm not going to get all whatever, hurrah, 50-year-old man loses his whatsits. But, it is the social media. I've got the Lamborghini. I've got the branded gear. Who knows where the money? Look at me. Here am I lying on my cash, etc. And so therefore, we have created, if you like, the perfect storm. Globalization has meant that money can move quicker and and easier. The internet has been a wonderful thing, and yes, it's great that you and I can talk to each other in different countries, but it still means that international crime, international money laundering, global transport links from South America, from East Asia, and we're not just talking drugs and what could be described as perhaps the glamorous ones, but bloody people trafficking, and we've been full of paedophilia and child sex abuse with the Epstein files. But this is if it wasn't dark already, that is even darker.
Yeah, I mean, I think often there's a conception that the kind of criminals that, we're talking about are people like the Kinahan cartel, they're really nasty people. But at the end of the day, they were just good Irish lads. They loved their mums, et cetera, et cetera. They almost could have fitted into a Guy Ritchie film, or The Godfather. Do you know what I mean? They're like that kind of scene. But what we're talking about really are these huge criminal organizations coming out of Southeast Asia, where they have essentially small towns of trafficked people who are forced to work literally at the point of a cattle prod to defraud pensioners all over the world. If they try and escape, they get killed. The money they earn, they steal, is stolen back from them. It is, an industrial form of criminality. We're talking about, what's happening in Russia, where you have essentially a criminal organization has taken over a nuclear state and has used that power to attack its sovereign neighbor and to kill hundreds of thousands of people. That's the criminality we're talking about. We're not talking about, nasty but localized phenomena, even like, the kind of mafia gangs that you get in Naples, nasty but essentially localized. These are global industries. They're like the Apple, the Google of crime. And and they are enemies of all the nice stuff. You know, they are enemies of democracy. They're enemies of, you know, people having rights. They're enemies of, you know, girls being able to do anything other than be sexually exploited. It is a really worrying future if this stuff is not stopped. And, you know, I can occasionally come across a bit preachy because, you know, I talk about, oh, we shouldn't be using cash and so on. And I've got no issue at all with 20 euro bills, 20 pound notes. But if we're printing limitless quantities of hundreds and 200s, you know, that's only to the benefit of criminals, really. And, you know, anyone who says, oh, I use them occasionally, okay, but you wouldn't be inconvenienced by using 20s or 50s, really. So, you know, essentially that's, you know, the really important thing to take away, that we are enabling a future where all of the nice stuff that we count on will be taken away.
The book is called Everybody Loves Our Dollars, How Money Laundering Won. It is by Oliver Bullough, who is speaking to today. Listeners, you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Just click on the rather attractive front cover and it'll be winging its way to you. If people want to follow you online and say nice things or find out how you make the perfect pizza, because that's apparently in your bio, I looked, you're like making the perfect pizza, watching rugby. I'm good with that. We'll wait and talk about the weekend's results and walking in the hills. Where can they find you?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm on the socials, on Instagram. Maybe I should put some pizza pictures on there. I do make a good pizza.
Yeah.
Instagram, you know, Blue Sky, you know, LinkedIn, the boring ones. That's me.
And you'd be able to buy them, obviously, with 20 euro bills or dollar bills rather than anything like. Oliver, yeah. I'm so glad we got you on because I knew this conversation was going to be great and needed to continue. The book is called Everybody Loves Our Dollars. It's by Oliver Bullough. Oliver, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on the show.